Ahmad Fawzi, welcome to #Peace Day.
Thank you, Jeremy Gilly. Always a pleasure to see you and talk to you.
The first thing I'd like to ask you, Ahmed, I've known you for a long time, but for those who don't know you, could you tell us about your journey and why the manifestation of a more peaceful and sustainable world has been so important to you?
Interesting question. Thank you for that question. It could be a very long answer, but just to be brief, I would first like to recognize those who have fallen in conflict around the world and say that on a day like this, the International Day of Peace, I think of them, I feel for their families. They're not just numbers or statistics. They are names, they are children, they are sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts. And I think we should pause to reflect on why all this is happening around the world and why the rich world is not doing anything about it. And I'll come to that point in a minute. My life, my journey happened in phases, in chunks. The first phase was as a broadcaster, a journalist, and then I joined the UN. In those three phases, I have seen conflict, I have seen war, I have seen the suffering that is caused by war with no gain, really, no gain. Former Yugoslavia breaking up, the Middle East in flames, yet again. And so I began asking myself, what can I do? What can we do as individuals to stop this madness? And I realize we probably don't have that much influence and power. Governments think they do. I think people do. You've seen what uprisings can do in countries. But I have found also that there isn't one main cause for war and conflict. There are many causes we can talk about. But first of all, that's why I took an interest, because I had joined an organization that wanted to end the scourge of war, as the first words of the charter says. And I devoted the rest of my life to that thought.
Ahmed, for those who don't know, could you just tell us about some of the individuals that you worked with at the United Nations?
Oh, at the United Nations and well before the United Nations, I think I didn't tell you that I was in the office of President Sadat in Egypt. I was the private secretary and press secretary for the First Lady, Jehan Sadat. But as such, I traveled with them whenever Mr. and Mrs. Sadat went on a mission somewhere or a visit officially. I was there on the plane with them. So I observed the president at very close quarters and occasionally did an assignment. But I was with him when he went to Jerusalem in 1977. Sadly, he was assassinated in 1981 by Islamic extremists. And there we are. See, extremism is a cause of conflict. And then I worked with Dr. Boutros Boutros-Ghali, who was threatened also, but fortunately lived until 92, the age of 92.
And he was the Secretary General of the United Nations when you were working with him.
Yes, he was the Secretary General from 91 to 96. In 97, Kofi Annan took over. I worked very closely with him, both for the 10 years when he was Secretary General and later when he established his foundation. I worked with Sergio Vieira de Mello, one of the stars of the UN hemisphere, brilliant negotiator, mediator, human rights high commissioner, been all over the world. Sergio Vieira de Mello was very sadly assassinated, along with 21 others of our colleagues in Baghdad in 2003, August. I worked with Lakhdar Brahimi, a veteran Algerian diplomat, used to be foreign minister, but went on many missions, troubleshooting missions under Boutros Boutros-Ghali and under Kofi Annan, and took me with him as his chief spokesman and communication advisor. Kofi Annan, of course, I was with him when he left, when his mandate ended, but Ban Ki-moon brought him back in as the UN envoy on Syria when Syria started to explode in 2011. We went in 2012 to try to calm the situation down, but sadly, he resigned in protest. There were other negotiators I worked with, like Ian Martin, brilliant British mediator, negotiator, chief of mission. Jan Eliasson, Swedish, brilliant diplomat, to name but a few.
Thank you, Ahmed. It's just the most incredible journey that you've had, and the knowledge and the wisdoms that you've gained over these years are absolutely extraordinary. And I'm grateful that you've passed on some of that knowledge to me to help Peace One Day do what it's done. Thank you. Why is it seemingly so difficult, even though we have the United Nations, to live peacefully and united as one?
Yeah, it seems quite a dilemma, doesn't it? But I can tell you various things. I can tell you education is an important factor, or the lack of education, which results in, especially among the youth, unemployed youth, boredom. Boredom. What happened in the UK recently when there were riots in the north, youth attacking a hotel that contained migrants based on a false rumor. There again, you have communication, false communication, that they had been involved in the murder of 3 young girls a week earlier. They had not. But it aroused these passions. And this excitement seems like an adventure to these young people who are bored, unemployed, are being exploited by xenophobic gangs. So education, trust of communication. Today, we are in a communication war, not just armed conflict, cyber war. And the United Nations has been taking a lot of steps to try and get people to understand the importance of verifying what they share before this. So, education, boredom, and I would say poverty. Many factors lead to conflict and war. Poverty is one of them. And by the way, Western countries, if the rich countries donate 1% of their GDP, I heard Bill Gates say something recently, 1%, $1,000, rich countries, to the poorer countries, to help them stabilize their countries and lift their people out of poverty. There would be less refugees dying in the Mediterranean. If this had been going on systematically over the past 50 years, I guarantee you there would be less conflict. But of course, there's climate change, which also is in itself a cause of conflict. People's lands drying up, seeking new opportunities, emigrating, fighting their neighbors for their cattle, and many other ingredients. So I tell you, it needs a combination of governments, corporations, reaching out to the people, not ignoring the people and the desires and wishes and needs of the people, reaching out to that and coming together in a social compact. What do you need? We will help you, but let's stop killing each other.
Ahmed, thank you. You've supported Peace One Day and myself for 25 years. It's actually longer than that. It's 25 years since we launched Peace One Day together at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And as you mentioned earlier, we actually met the year before. But why? Why have you been there 100% for me? Whenever I've needed you, whenever I've called you, you have always been there for me, advising me, supporting me. Why?
Smile, Jeremy. It's been good. We've had challenges, but I tell you what, you were either, as Kieran Pendergast said, when somebody comes to us with a crazy idea like this, he's either crazy or a visionary. So I wanted to find out whether you were just nuts or a visionary. And I saw that you needed help, you needed guidance through the labyrinth of the United Nations. So I started gently guiding you and opening doors, getting people to meet you, getting missions to collaborate, because the concept was, and let's be clear here, the General Assembly voted to have an International Day of Peace back in 1981. And I remember sarcastically asking this young man sitting across me in my office with a ponytail what he meant by an International Day of Peace. And you said, well, what day is it? So I thought for a few seconds and I saw what you were getting at. There was no fixed date. There's a UN Human Rights Day. There's a UN HIV/AIDS Day. There's a UN Environment Day. There's a UN Food Day, but there's no Peace Day fixed in the UN calendar. And that was your challenge. And I immediately thought, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Who doesn't support peace? Mad people don't support peace. Criminals don't support peace. The battle between good and evil goes on in this world. And I wanted to be on the side of good. And I wanted you to succeed. You sounded a bit dubious, and I was dubious at first, but there was a certainty in your actions that was also very inspiring, I must say, and don't blush, but you're passionate about what you do, and your passion is contagious. So I firmly believed that you needed support and I could provide it. That's why. Simple question, simple answer.
Well, thank goodness you did, because there's just no way we would be here 25 years on if it hadn't been for you, Ahmad Fawzi. That's just absolutely clear. And so thank you for all of that. But we wanted to have a peace day with a fixed calendar date, the UN International Day of Peace. And we also wanted to be a day of ceasefire and non-violence. And in order to do that, we needed to create a new UN resolution. Could you talk to us a little bit about the mechanic of that and what was at stake, and just a few memories of making that possible?
Jeremy, I mean, it was a long journey. I encouraged you to lobby many member states, especially the UK, because they were behind the first resolution, and Costa Rica, which was behind the first resolution. And you did all that. But I'm going to ask you a similar question. What do you think turned it round in the UK Foreign Office?
I think that, well, look, firstly, there was a few things, wasn't there? Firstly, you believing in what we were doing and opening doors. You'll remember that I had access and was introduced to Kieran Prendergast. Kieran Prendergast, as you know well, became a good supporter of ours, didn't he? And was very, very helpful, as was Shashi Tharoor and others. We built a constituency of wonderful people at the United Nations who were really behind trying to make this happen, which was led by you, and that was incredible. I think we had a good person at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Serena Brocklebank, who's been spoken to today, who didn't want to give up on it either. And so we had that insider who was very much influential at the FCO. And of course, that made it to Jeremy Greenstock, and of course he was very supportive as well. I think the Costa Ricans, the fact that Dr. Oscar Arias and Don Rodrigo Carazo had been the president, the fact that they were so supportive, and we sort of had Costa Rica involved, who were originally in 1981, as we know, were influential in the creation of a UN Day of Peace, which didn't have a fixed calendar date. So I think that we were clever, weren't we? I mean, we were clever as a team, And there was a wonderful man, a man called Joel Dueck, who had been at the UN, who was also helping us at that point, and he was incredible. So I think there were just a lot of people really that were making it possible. And I think there was one name that, of course, just has to be mentioned, and that is the Secretary General Kofi Annan at the time. And he is a dear friend of yours, a massive inspiration to you and you to him. And I had the privilege and of being able to be in a room with him just for a moment, not like you had been in many rooms and many planes. And I think the fact that he said, this is a great idea. Mary Robinson, of course, saying it was a great idea. It just got momentum, didn't it? And the fact that we were making films, Ahmed, lastly to say, we kept making those short films and we kept putting all those people in it. And then we kept showing those films to everyone. And we got the ball rolling, didn't we? And fortunately, thankfully, it didn't stop. And of course, together with many others, it happened.
Yes, thank you. But that goes to show that there are many expressions. It takes two to tango. One hand can't clap alone. So it took many people, many missions, many hours of talks and passion. It took passion and compassion. And you finally succeeded in getting Sir Jeremy Greenstock, who was the UK ambassador to the UN at the time, to propose the resolution. It was seconded and it was passed. Mm-hmm. So congratulations for doing that. But the next step, of course, was to see if it would work anywhere, right?
Yeah. And I remember coming to you and saying, look, we need to manifest a ceasefire, and actually there was quite a few tough moments between you and I. Where I just said, sorry, am I pushing you too hard? I used to say to you, if you remember, and you used to say you're a bit of a tree hugger. and I think that if anyone who wants to see the way in which it all went about, of course they can see the first Peace One Day documentary, of course, which features Ahmed greatly, and of course the Day After Peace, which again Ahmed's story is told in that as well. But you're right, Ahmed, we had to prove to the cynics, we had to prove that this Day of Peace with a fixed calendar date, the UN International Day of Peace, the Day of Ceasefire and Non-Violence, which had been created, could actually work. And I kept coming to you, and eventually you with your colleagues decided that we would try and make it work in Afghanistan. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
I remember, yes, desperately seeking an area, a mission. I remember I used the word ripe, that was ripe for a ceasefire. I remember convening a meeting with my colleagues and inviting you to that meeting in what was known as the Department of Public Information, DPI, in New York at the time. And I had my colleagues from every discipline and every country desk. And I think I may have invited UNDP and UNICEF. It was Dan Thomas at the time, remember? Yeah. And I said, we need to find a mission which is ripe, where peace negotiations are going on, and we think we might have a situation where a ceasefire can be achieved. A few days later, I got the call from Dan Thomas at UNICEF, was it, or UNDP? UNICEF. And he said, Ahmad, I think I have it. What do you want to do? It's Afghanistan. I said, no, give me a few minutes. I called you. I said, I think you should go to Afghanistan. The combination, the stars have aligned in such a way that UNICEF wants to go in with WHO and vaccinate over 1 million children in a certain hostile area that is controlled by the Taliban. And you have several elements that are going to be working together there. And you can document all that and get a feel for things and how they're moving forward or not. Because you had UNAMA, which was the UN mission in Afghanistan, assistance mission in Afghanistan. You had ISAF, which was the International Security Force in Afghanistan. You had UNICEF and WHO. And you took Jude Law with you. You had Adrian Edwards, who was and still is a magnificent compassionate person. He was the spokesman of the UN mission there. This all came together. So with a bit of public information and communication and the negotiations going back and forth with the Taliban, it clicked. It clicked. And I remember seeing your film The Day After Peace and you sitting in a tent or something with Jude Law saying, this is it. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And I don't know what I'm going to do if it doesn't happen. The next day it happened. We got a letter from the Taliban. I mean, the mission got a letter from the Taliban saying we agree to a ceasefire on the International Day of Peace for 1 week. UNICEF and WHO sent in tens of thousands of workers to vaccinate over 1 million children against polio. It worked. The next day, when, or 2 or 3 days later, when our Department of Security, DSS, Department of Safety and Security, announced that there had been a 70% reduction in violence. Therefore, there was cause to celebrate and to realize that this isn't just talk in the ether. It's not just, you know, us being idealistic tree huggers. It's true. When you focus and when you convince people and when the health of your children is concerned, even the Taliban will come round and say, please go ahead. So that was a very encouraging result, wasn't it?
It was absolutely unbelievable. It's wonderful to hear you remind us of that story. Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah, and people can see that whole story and everything that Ahmed has spoken about in, of course, The Day After Peace, and I hope people do at the Peace One Day YouTube channel. And then, you know, after we'd done that, Ahmed, then, of course, we spent another 15 years working together. Can you believe it? Trying to institutionalize the day, to make sure that everyone in the world knows about it. We think that number is probably 3 billion people fully aware by 2025. I think that's highly realistic. We saw 23 billion movements in 24 hours of the 2 words Peace Day last year. That tells you there's a lot of movement going on in the world now around this day. And of course, we will analyze very carefully in the lead up to Peace Day next year in terms of understanding if we're close to the institutionalization. Why? Well, because the behavioral change that you've just discussed in Afghanistan, when people focus their attention, you know, leads to lives being affected in a positive way, can obviously happen in our homes, communities, schools, and places of work, because we're all involved in peaceful activity. And there lied why we then continue to work together, you know, at the United Nations, you know, every Peace Day, doing concerts, doing events, doing digital experiences, and celebrating the 20 years together at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, 20 years after we'd set it all up. You know, it's been an amazing journey that we've been on, Ahmed, and you know, you are just a legend and a friend, and I love you, and I thank you for everything that you've ever done for me.
Thank you.
There's nobody on this planet that I mean, in a way, feel so much in relation to you and me, and what you've meant to me to keep me going.
It's mutual, Jeremy. It's mutual.
Through the tough times. Thank you, man. So I want to ask you then, having paid my respects to you as passionately as I can and meaningfully, I want to ask you, okay, what do you want Peace Day to achieve for the next 25 years? And what's your message to those individuals who may feel despair at this particular moment as we look at the spiraling that the world seems to be doing in the wrong direction? I want you to, first of all, say what your vision for the next 25 years of Peace Day would be, and also a message for those who might be struggling at this point.
Again, a very big question. A vision that Peace Day, hashtag Peace Day, the International Day of Peace, 21st of September, as you say, becomes institutionalized, becomes in the minds and the thoughts of every person, peace-loving or not, in the world, to think, oh, it's almost the 21st of September. What will you do to make peace? I want everybody watching to tell their neighbors and their friends and their lovers and their enemies. Peace Day is coming up, guys. And it is possible to achieve. It is possible through helping the poor, eradicating poverty. Kofi Annan used to say, educate a girl and you eradicate poverty. A girl, because you are lifting her standard of living, she lifts her family's standard of living, and it has a roll-on effect in the community and in the society and in the country where she lives. So education, stability, security. As I often said, and this I didn't invent, but Kofi Annan often said, Jan Eliasson said, many of my colleagues said, there is no development without peace. A country cannot develop. We are fortunate to be living in developed countries, pardon me. These countries are in the top 10 of the most developed countries in the world. Why? Because they are at peace with themselves and their neighbors. Because there is respect for human rights and the rule of law. So no development without peace, and no peace without development. And you can't have either without respect for human rights and the rule of law. We have been saying this at the United Nations and many other fora ad nauseum. Governments understand it, but governments have national interests. And I dream to see the day when their national interests align with the interests and rights of their people. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Agreed.
And the other thing is, what do I tell people? I think that message is clear. Never lose hope. Never lose hope. Hope is the engine. Dreams are the engine of our ambition and our action. And as you often say, storytelling is important. Tell positive stories to your neighbors and your friends and your children and your school children. Because that way you will, and what is it you say, those three words, Jeremy?
Inform, inspire, engage.
Inform, inspire, engage. And that leads to saving lives. Thank you very much.
Ahmad Fawzi, thank you for joining us for #Peace Day.
And by the way, you mentioned Kofi Annan and Mary Robinson. It just occurred to me that I have been invited to host the Kofi Annan Peace Lecture in Geneva on the 15th of October. And the guest speaker is Mary Robinson. So we will be remembering Kofi Annan. Mary Robinson will be there, and I will be moderating the discussion.
Well, people should tune in for that. Go to the Kofi Annan Foundation to find out more. Ahmad Fawzi, thank you so much.
Thank you too.